because we had this whole debate about whether we should have Charlie Munger named in the title or not.
That's right.
Yes. Because more people know Pat than
Charlie
Munger. Yeah.
We've managed to keep a low
12
profile.
amazing Pat Flynn quotes. We can switch it.
I could say that I come away with 2 to 4 that are either shocking or amazing each time I go to Buttery.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even if you're
Pat's
not there,
always there.
But even if he's not, which is very rare, somebody will be quoting him there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I wonder if they'll buy my book when it comes out.
Ooh.
Yeah.
I think this audience will buy your book.
70% of this book was written here.
This audience will buy this book.
Yeah.
I hope.
I just also want to mention when we go live that Mike Halfish should know that you know both of us.
Yeah.
Who is that guy? He's in every thread. Not just mine, but like people I'm connected with that I don't understand how he's on.
Here's the frown. Whenever you see this pose, this posture,
it's not promising. Impending disaster.
That is not promising.
We've been live for a minute and a half, and it refuses to transition from the slide in OBS.
Well, people could look at the slide the whole time. It wouldn't be as interesting. Yeah.
Oh, we just came up?
Yep.
Awesome.
So welcome, everybody.
Okay.
Because we are not only up, we are in top form.
Yes, we are.
Yes, we are.
So, Somnath, I think today promises to be exciting with lots of new viewers.
I think so.
We're routinely breaking through the tens of thousands of views now.
Yeah.
So why don't you take a minute and just introduce yourself, and then we'll introduce our special guest, Pat Flynn.
That's very nice. Well, my name's Sam Sikdar, for those of you that are not aware of me. I run a couple martial arts schools and a mastermind group for martial arts school owners.
And I have known you since you were this big.
Literally.
Yeah.
That big.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I've known Sam for a very long time. And I've been bowing to you since, I was in my 30s and you were,
12.
Yeah, 12.
Yeah.
I'm Dave Fries. We are the regular hosts of In Top Form, along with the erstwhile, occasionally now, Alex Fries, who will be back on the show live. We'll have to get you up for one of those.
Oh, that'd be great.
When he comes back from Kansas City. And today, Sam, why don't you introduce our very special guest?
We are very lucky to have the one and only Pat Flynn with us.
Well, there's 2 Pat Flynns, actually. So the one and only is not totally accurate.
So
we've got
I've already lied to you.
I don't know if it's a lie if you didn't intend for it to be.
I didn't.
Yeah, as long as we don't try to continue to play it off.
Right.
So a quick little thing about the other Pat Flynn. On a podcast I did with a friend of mine, we were talking about passive income, which is kind of his shtick, right? So we titled the podcast "The Secret to Passive Income" with "Not That Pat Flynn."
The other.
With "Not That Pat Flynn," which is me. I'm not that.
Well, you're as famous as the other Pat Flynn in your own world.
Yeah, so it really depends where you're coming from. If you come through the lens of fitness and kettlebells, you're going to find me first. If you come through the lens of business or online marketing or podcasting, you're going to find the other Pat Flynn. So it gets a little messy because I do talk a lot about business stuff, and now that I've started doing podcasting myself, there's been a few mix-ups.
You have a middle initial?
Yeah, well, I'm just going to do Patrick from now on. And same thing with my new book. The publisher's like, "What do you want your name to be?" I'm like, "He says Pat Flynn, okay." I'm like, "No, I want Patrick now." So we're going back. And it's just, that's what it's going to be. Yeah, going long form. Yeah. But in top form.
Today, this is perfect for you because even though you're in the fitness world, you're very well known for something else. And you have a new book coming out. Who's your publisher for this book?
It is Ben Bella. So they're a very interesting publisher. And Bedros Keuilian his next book's coming out with them as well. And they do a lot in the health and fitness space, but what I'm doing is not a health and fitness book.
So tell us a little bit about it because it's going to... Well, let me tell everybody the title because today we're doing 12 amazing Charlie Munger quotes, thoughts, business, and life resources that'll make you healthy, wealthy, and wise. And we debated, actually, whether to put the name Charlie Munger in there or not because a lot of people do not know who Charlie is. So we'll just say here, he is in top form, especially for his age, and he is Warren Buffett's partner of many decades.
How old is he?
Oh, He's well into his 80s.
That's what I thought.
Well into his 80s. So that's our topic. And the reason we thought of you, Pat, is this new book you have coming out, which is a really perfect match to how Charlie Munger thinks.
It is. So the book is based around this concept of generalism, is sort of the philosophy that I use in the book. And my argument is really pretty simple. And that is, if you want to get ahead, at least in today's age, focus on breadth and combination of skills rather than going for depth in any one area. So the thrust of the book is that skill stacking is more advantageous than specialization.
I have a theory about this that I've held for some time, and then when you were talking on another podcast where I was listening to you the other day, that this came to me, I think, as applicable. When you do what you are advocating, which is becoming a short-term specialist in various topics to develop really strong skill sets. So even if you leave that and don't use it for a while, the example you used is like riding a bike. It's still there for you when you come back. You just give it a little bit of extra attention. But what you're really describing is mastering the process of learning and becoming at least a workable master of lots of different things.
Yes, and having a system for skill acquisition for when you need it, and also realizing and this is a number of subjects that I try and touch in the book, and each of them could be an episode by themselves, of how far do I need to go with every skill? And how do I find out how far I need to go with every skill?
You sort of have a rule of thumb on that.
Well, I use this thing, and Sam and I were talking about at the gym the other day, is the system for development has to focus on integration over isolation. So you don't focus on just building a skill by itself. You focus on bringing that skill up within a context of an outcome. So let's take music, for example. I think this is a pretty simple one. You don't sit there and learn every scale and every chord that you need to know. Say you just want to play an AC/DC song, all right? What scales and what chords do I need to know to play this AC/DC song? Those are the ones that I focus on. I can leave like the E13 flat 7 chords alone. They're just not useful for me right now. So by focusing on integration rather than isolation, it really helps you to be more of an effective minimalist in how you approach skills to get just what you need to achieve a certain outcome, but not waste your time on developing certain areas that might not be of immediate benefit.
And you're not advocating being a dilettante, which my grandfather accused me of at a very young age. But I mastered what you're describing here, which is how you develop a pretty reasonable level of expertise without going too far in lots of things, and then pull them together as needed in various ways, which matches very much Charlie Munger's worldview. But here's why I think, and I want to know if you agree, that that's so valuable in today's world. Software version 1 comes out, version 2 is out like 3 weeks later. The pace of change has accelerated so much that people who have mastered this process that you're describing as underlying everything they're going to thrive in a world where that's happening, because they're not afraid of change, because they've subjected themselves to it and inoculated themselves to it and built a system to deal with it.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, if you can master the process of mastery itself, then no amount of change or rate of change, that will only benefit you. As a matter of fact, the more that you can become familiar with the process of skill development, the faster things change. That's good for you, because most people are not familiar with that process. So you learn to welcome the change and almost encourage a change, because that creates new opportunities for you to develop skills quicker and more efficiently than other people will be able to.
So that transitions us, or segues us right to Charlie Munger, because he calls this thing that you're describing the Lollapalooza effect, which is, he describes what he does as develop models, which are really levels of expertise and kind of systems of handling one area, a certain amount of knowledge about it. And then what he says is, when you get 2 or 3 or 4 of these models aligning on a particular project or with a particular company or whatever it is that you're doing, that the synergy is more than 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1.
Yes.
And that, I think, lies at the heart of your generalism theory, too.
It does. To take another example, it's really a 1 plus 1 equals 3 type of thing. Where a good writer and a good marketer is always going to outperform somebody who is either a great writer or a great marketer. Just as a very sort of simple...
They're going to be able to write a pretty good book and then know how to sell it.
And then put it in front of people, yeah.
And they're going to write, if they're really pretty good at both those things, they'll be thinking very carefully about who the audience is before they write the book.
And I'll be early to admit that I don't know much about Munger, except for that when I was doing research on generalists, his name kept popping up, and maybe we could link this in the show notes. There's an excellent, I think it was Forbes, where there was an article that described him as the expert generalist, which is more of a corporate term and a little bit more narrow than probably what we're going to talk about here. but it explains in detail his model that you just went through, which is kind of a classic model that other people have used for since the Enlightenment, really, or even before that in some cases.
Roman and Greek thinkers.
Yeah, I mean Aristotle and then Aquinas was huge on this of approaching problems from all different perspectives in order to try and find the best way or the right answer, never just coming through one direction. So it's just interesting how he's applied it, obviously, to accumulating large amounts of financial wealth.
But I think he and Buffett are pretty happy too. I mean, they play bridge. They live in modest homes. They just don't get carried away with all of the crazy things that people who start to build a little bit of wealth allow themselves to get. And they didn't seek the fame that they have. And obviously Buffett's more famous than his more silent partner. They didn't seek the fame, but they also don't abuse it. They use it very carefully. And then they kind of, they're not out there. They're not Kanye and who's Kanye with? I'm not good with the pop.
I wouldn't know.
I don't know why.
The wrong
Producer
group.
Leslie? No. This is
Wait,
the wrong
who
group.
is he married?
Kanye West is married to another...
Kim Kardashian.
Kim Kardashian, thank
there
you.
you go.
Yeah.
Leave it up to the female.
So here's why this is a perfect in top form show. Is we're going to be talking about a mindset and then a way to take that mindset and make it work really well in the real world. And then we're going to talk about why that works in business and tangentially, at least, if not directly, why it really makes for a better life, too.
Yeah.
And that's what this show is all about. So, Charlie Munger, I started reading Charlie Munger's Almanack. Did you see, Producer Leslie, I gave you a little link to that?
Yep.
Which we should tell people is an affiliate link that will enrich us. There
few
is no
cents at a
telling
time.
Support the show.
what we're going to do with
Yeah, please support
that
the show.
$6 we might get.
Yeah.
You guys already got up to the $6 mark?
What's an expensive book? But
One of us can have a cup of coffee.
the other can watch.
That's right.
Oh, man.
Yeah, if it's that sort of light, fruity kind of coffee, you can have
No,
it.
you can have it.
Yeah, I don't
I'll
want
take
that.
it.
You'll drink
I'll
it,
take
yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Because you have a lot of that. Like you could thrive out in San Francisco, where we'd be constantly looking at punching people.
Well, I'm more of a generalist when it comes to my coffee.
To coffee.
Yeah.
I will, to be fair, actually drink it, and as I put it to you, I'll choke one down.
Yeah.
Then wipe your tongue
Well,
afterwards.
I did say to the vendor of a coffee recently, please get me a napkin so I can wipe the flavor of it. Which, by the way, does get people's attention, as it turns out.
Yeah,
I
insulting people, that'll do it.
Well, I usually I don't usually break that one out unless I don't care and somebody really deserves it. Or I've built a foundation of love so that everybody finds that at least moderately amusing / irritating.
Sure.
Yeah, that's how I think of it anyway. So we have, the way I came to this was I was rereading Charlie Munger's Almanack, which is based on the idea of Poor Richard's Almanack. That's scaring me, Producer Leslie.
Why? You guys just laugh very loudly.
Oh, and it spiked?
Yeah. That's all.
I was recently
Fix it in post.
conducting a session, a kind of a high-level consulting coaching session with some business people. And at one point, I clapped like this so that I would be able to find on the audio.
Yeah.
And the guy said, "What are you doing?" So I explained to him why I did it and how it would make it easier for me to find it. And then he would periodically just randomly start clapping. But what he didn't realize is my clap
Do we
was the
both
first
know who
one.
this person is?
We do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised by that behavior.
Oh, yeah.
at
There's
all.
a lot of acting out since he was very young.
Steve Richardson said, "I'm guessing you're not keeping up with the Kardashians."
No. I did one time go to a club called Tao or Dow, I guess depending on how seriously you take these things, in Las Vegas, with a Kardashian. I met her quite by accident in the lobby of one of those hotels, the ones with the Italian names all look the same to me.
Yeah.
And she was with her little entourage, and they were dressed very outrageously, and I didn't realize who she was, which she was fascinated by, that there was a person who didn't know who she was. She would be horrified by this, by what just happened here. And I explained to her that I thought that women should wear dresses or skirts that went below like a certain level, that because we don't have the explicit rating, so that at least this one thing was covered up.
Right.
And she said, "I like you, because I didn't know who she was, and my immediate reaction was to say insulting things. So then I went to this club, and I observed the whole thing that goes on around the Kardashian women. It was shocking. So that's my sole Kardashian story. I didn't ask any Bruce Jenner questions. Have you seen? If our audience has not watched Joe Rogan's Triggered, it will trigger many of our audience.
Yeah.
But he did a show called Triggered in San Francisco, and talked among other things about how he wasn't, quote, going out like Bruce Jenner. So
all right.
That. So we'll give you a link in the show notes to get your own copy of this book, which is amazing. I'd say everything we've got in today's show came from the first, I'm going to guess, 45 pages of a 400 or 500 page book. So it is dense with stuff that you can take and apply to your business and your life. I'm also going to throw in for everybody, and later in the show we'll have a reading list that Munger himself recommends.
Yeah.
But this Dalio book, I'm now almost done. And
The Principles one. Yeah.
So good. So we'll have a link for Ray Dalio's book too. It fits in very nicely with this. It's coming from a totally different mindset, but very complementary. So we'll go over some themes and things. Charlie Munger, first thing, was a generalist and highly informed by the ideas of evolution and philosophy. You can see Darwin in a lot of what he's talking about there. And Pat, I think that's one of the reasons that this fits in so nicely with generalism versus specialization. And another part of my theory and why generalists, apart from the fact that they really learn to learn, and they're really learning to adapt. So in nature, every animal and plant and single-celled organism over-reproduces.
Yes.
Because the environment's going to change, and it increases the odds that some of those offspring are going to be better adapted. And I think that's what you're doing. You're doing the mental version of that in your own mind. You're making a highly adaptive version of Pat Flynn that's got lots of skill sets at a fairly high level of function, so that when things change or when you meet a new challenge or difficulty, you can kind of rearrange those.
Yeah, well, I think fundamentally we can argue that the reason humans have the command over our environment that we do, and that the reason we're at the top of the food chain, is because we don't specialize, right? So, I mean, relatively compared to pretty much any other order of species, we kind of suck when you look at specialization. I mean, cheetahs are faster, gorillas are stronger, baboons are less likely to cheat on their wife, and
Bonobo's more likely to. But
but
I don't know how that even fits in here.
So on and so forth, right? But the reason that we're ahead of all of them is because we have an intelligence that allows us to adapt, to pretty much live anywhere and thrive under the most, cruel conditions. So I mean, from just an evolutionary standpoint, it's been our intelligent ability to adapt and become generalists. We're not better. It really, in any other sense, aside from our ability to adapt and generalize, than pretty much any other species on Earth.
Well, the only thing we're great at that none of them are is storytelling, which helps us to be great generalists.
That's it. Yeah, that's really it. So there is an evolutionary basis, I think, to all of this, but I think that humans are set up to be generalists. Like they say, specialization is for the birds, right? Or specialization is for the insects. And not to say that the world doesn't need specialists. You
want a cardiac specialist doing your heart surgery.
Exactly, right? I don't want a generalist doing the brain surgery, and there are people who, like Tiger Woods, there needs to be Tiger Woods, but most people aren't meant to be Tiger Woods, right? And that's kind of my argument. They're like, Tiger Woods doesn't need to read my book. He really, unless he wants to be interested in other things as well. But most people are not set up to be the best in the world. So there's different ways that we can define specialists. There's the specialist that you call Verizon Wireless, and they say, sorry, all specialists are currently with somebody not very interested in that type of specialist, right? The specialist that I'm kind of arguing against is somebody who's trying to be the best in the world at something. And for most people, most of the time, I think that's a very futile effort. And not only does it lead to diminished returns and opportunity costs, but your chances of actually succeeding in that department against a Tiger Woods, against a Michael Jordan, or somebody like that are very, very narrow, as opposed to if you took a more generalized approach and focus on stacking skills rather than specializing in any one.
And I think you'll find that some of the great experts, that we know them for this one thing, they are actually generalists too.
Yes.
It just gets blinded out by, you don't see the stars behind the sun. That doesn't mean the stars aren't there.
And that's another argument I try to make, is a lot of people that we think are the best in the world, when you take a little bit deeper look, actually they're just really good at a lot of things. Now there are Michael Jordan's, or another interesting example, somebody was the best because they specialized, but then they reached a new level when they generalized. So Michael Jordan's a good example. When he focused on being a one-man team and a high scorer, they were never able to beat the Pistons. And right? But then when he stepped back and was like, I'm going to fill the gaps of the team. I'm going to be the guy who supports and who can handle all roles. Then they won their championships.
So he was specialized in the sense that he's learning skills in basketball, but he became a generalist within those skill sets.
He also was a multi-sport athlete.
Yeah.
Remember, which
Baseball,
there's a lot of arguments for that too, and not just baseball.
Baseball, golf.
Yeah.
Golfer.
So he had even though he's considered like the best in the world, he really kind of had, whereas other people were just basketball all the time, he really had a multi-sport kind of foundation, which, I was talking to Dan John about this and some other people, and that's really what coaches are looking for now. And it's kind of, it's not really intuitive, but it's there where people who play multiple sports, it's another thing of like 1 + 1 = 3, where there's certain qualities that carry over that can actually make them better specialists. So there's a very interesting interplay that goes into all this. And it's really hard to find an example on any extreme where some level of generalization isn't involved. So part of the book is actually just even busting up the myth that specialization is even a thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right? And then the other part is examining, well, how far do we need to specialize? What's worth it? And is there a better way to approach success and getting ahead in life? And that's where we get into the idea of skill stacking or breadth rather than depth of skill.
And so a couple things I hear in there. One, we're not saying we don't want specialists who are uniquely, probably atomically or anatomically or through some brain function, uniquely able to excel in this one area to become the best in the world. But even they almost always benefit from beginning the practices of a generalist. So I know one of the top brain surgeons in the world, top neurosurgeons, but he's a jazz musician. And he's not a great jazz musician, but he loves to perform. I mean, he is. He's just not world class as a jazz musician, or hasn't become famous at least for being a jazz musician. But he's a better surgeon because he's a jazz musician.
Yes.
So that's again gets us back to Charlie Munger. So Charlie Munger calls this creating models. These are really areas where you're a generalist and developing lots of knowledge. Not becoming so expert that you have to focus on that exclusively. But as you observe, for a given period of time, when you're studying a topic or building a model of understanding something or building a physical skill, you're gonna specialize in that for a time being.
Yes. So I've been using the term short-term specialization, but as I've been writing the book, I've almost kind of thought about switching it towards short-term obsession.
Yeah, that's what it is for me.
Yes, and I think there's an important emphasis there, right? Like if you want it, so the idea, just to back it up a little bit, is if you want to become good at a lot of things, you don't try and do all of them at once.
Right.
It dilutes effort, it dilutes discipline. We can talk about discipline fatigue, which I know some people don't believe in, but I do. And really,
but
the small tweak that you make here is to become a good generalist is you focus on short-term specialization or short-term obsession, where you really surge and push in just one or two directions at a time. Right. Get that up to whatever level you need for that thing you want to do or that thing you want to build, while maintaining everything else. And we can talk about percentages of efforts and how you would allocate that, and that's kind of a flexible thing. And then once that skill or those two skills are up to that certain level, you bring those to maintenance and you focus on something else. So if you were to take a snapshot of somebody who's working on becoming a generalist, at any point in time it would probably look like they're specializing, right?
Yeah.
But if you zoom out, then you can see the clear picture of what's being formed.
So I want to keep going. We're going to have you back as the book gets closer to publication.
Long time from now.
Yeah, well, we'll have you back many times between now and then. But I want to dig deeply into the models and those percentages of those numbers, because as you were discussing them in another interview where I heard you, a lot of that rang true to me, and this has been something I've been doing since I was a little kid. I mean, my grandfather really did call me a dilettante when I was like 7 or 8 years old. But what happened is I become fascinated with photography, and I would do nothing but understand how you mix the chemicals, what was happening, how you took the shots, how you did composition. And so, I mean, I became a stringer for a local newspaper, which is not saying much about photography in those days, but you had to develop all your own film, develop your prints.
Yeah.
When I was like 12 years old. And so I developed this amazing skill set. And then it wasn't that I totally lost interest in it or didn't pursue it anymore, but I was off to the next thing that I wanted to develop expertise in. And that knowledge of photography I use all the time to this day. So Charlie Munger, this is number 2. So I think we've talked about the first one, this idea of, really being a fan of evolution and philosophy and where that gets us and how we have to throw off lots of ideas because a lot of those babies aren't going to make it. That's how that applies to us in business and life. So we need to be prolific in how we create ideas and prolific in trying to develop, be part-time specialists and prolific in understanding lots of different areas.
Yeah.
He also, I was fascinated by this, the way he described it was, he was a fan of becoming friends with the eminent dead.
Yeah.
And in particular, he was fascinated with Cicero, a lot of the Greek and Roman thinkers, Franklin, Jefferson. And so, he obviously drew very heavily on Franklin, and all of these people are flawed in their own ways. But I think he said when you find somebody who historically really cultivated these skills that made you great, pay attention to them. And so he was, as a result of that, I think, a giant fan of biography and autobiography.
Yeah.
I think there are limits to biography and autobiography because a lot of times in autobiography, things that make people great are beyond their conscious awareness. It's part of what makes them great. But there are a few people from time to time in history who are able to sort of unpack what it is that they're really doing.
Yes.
Biographers, on the other hand, are probably better if they're really skilled at this, at unpacking those kinds of things, but they're obviously getting everything through the filter of time and history if they're not sitting down with the person. But Munger's view was, I get lots of information about specialists who were able to really take their thinking to new levels, and that's a way that I get access to that. So your thoughts on that? Is that true for either of you guys?
Yeah, I really like the idea of where possible, starting where other people have finished. That's not always possible. I mean, there's some things where you have to start exactly where they start because there's no skipping ahead. I think if you can, wherever feasible, like learn from other people's mistakes rather than having to commit those mistakes yourself. Again, not always possible. Sometimes you just have to learn something the hard way through direct experience. But that's always been something that I've also gotten out of biographies and autobiographies is that they provide certain shortcuts so that way you don't have to waste 20 years of your life getting to the place that they already got to in whatever field that is because they've already gotten there. So now we can just see how they got there. We can kind of speed up to this point, make sure we agree with it or maybe not. And then from this point, where do we go from now? So, I mean, a lot of this is already inherent. I mean, we're always just starting from the stuff that people have left behind, whether it's iPhone or technology or whatever. But I think a lot of people miss out on just the general knowledge that people leave behind by not cracking open the biographies and autobiographies.
I'm a better martial artist because even though you have unique skill sets and superior ability to do them, I'm not starting from scratch.
Right.
And so even though, as you say, Pat, there's some things you just got to learn by trial and error, I think that it speeds the process up of studying with a person who has expertise and studying the mindset and the information that's in biography and autobiography. So I think that for me, one of the lessons I took from this is I've moved away. I was an avid reader of biographies and autobiographies, and I've kind of moved away from that in my reading. But even Ray Dalio's book, Principles, has that huge, essentially autobiographical section at the front of it, which interestingly he says, look, I'm not bragging when I tell you these things. I'm telling you these things so it gives context to what I write afterwards. So if you're going to skip a part of the book, skip the autobiographical piece, that would be insane.
Yeah.
Because he's so transparent, intentionally or not, in describing all the mistakes he made, to your point, how he figured things out, that just reading that internal process that he's going through. Now, granted, you're reading his recollection many years later of it, which is colored by what happens afterwards, but it's still pretty useful. So I have decided, under the how can this help us now, that I'm putting biography and autobiography back in methodically, because I read a lot of books. And I tend to do your process even in reading books. I'll get on a thing, and I'll read lots of business books, I'll read lots of fiction, and nothing else gets in there. But I think I'm going to throw biography and autobiography back into the mix. And because of how I do things, that'll probably mean I'll read like 4 or 5 biographies or autobiographies in a row. But the other thing that comes from being a specialist for a short period of time with the idea of being good at many things is that you notice patterns in biographies or patterns in fiction or systems that you wouldn't notice if you didn't read them all at the same time. Like, did you ever do that thing when you were a kid where you do the stick figure and you flipped it like that?
Oh, yeah.
Did you do that? So you get a totally different view of what's happening when you flick it like that than if I handed you one a week
Right.
of one stick figure. Like, you just wouldn't see the pattern. So I like that. That's my takeaway from that. Any takeaways for you guys for this one?
Maybe just a mention of some biographies or autobiographies that we've enjoyed.
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
useful.
Yeah, I'm not a big biography reader.
I'm not.
He's too busy writing his own.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
There's something to be said about that. You can't spend your life reading about other people's lives.
Yeah.
You gotta
Well, reading is one
do
of those
something too.
beautiful
Yeah.
things. It's like art. You can get so carried away with it that you don't do.
Yeah.
But there's an autobiography of Jefferson and an autobiography of Franklin that I've read recently that I'll share in the show notes. And I love to go back and periodically read Franklin's autobiography. It was written later in life, but he has these very vivid memories of his youth and what he was thinking of things. And that's pretty powerful.
Yeah, I liked my favorite, and I'm a bit biased here because he's kind of a guy I admire in many ways, was Mark Twain's autobiography, Chapters from My Autobiography.
So good, yeah.
Because not only is it brilliantly written like anything else, but there's just so much useful stuff in there too, of just everything he went through, his process, and that he was somebody that I'm trying to highlight in my book as a generalist in many ways.
Put him first up.
Yeah.
So just while you're on your book, and then we'll get to number 3. My understanding is that you're covering some famous people like that.
Yes.
But then you've also been sort of sorting out people that may not be super well known.
Yeah.
But who are really good at this thing that you're talking about.
Well, I think that's really important, is that there's, first off, how do you even define success? And that is a hard topic right there. So I didn't want to paint the picture that success means being the most well-known or the most famous. So I want to ring some bells in the book and be like, yeah, like these people you thought were the best in the world actually were more generalists than they were special. People like Mark Twain, no doubt, people consider him like the great American novelist or writer, but he was also an inventor, a philosopher, and all that made a humorist.
Speaker.
Yeah, I mean, it was his humorous stuff that really broke him out, his travel writing that broke him out to even give him the chance to write novels. A speaker, he was arguably the first stand-up comic.
Yeah.
They called it lecturing back in those days, but it was really
Which
stand-up
does sound
comedy.
exciting.
Yeah, which sounds exciting. So
They really know how to promote stuff in the old days.
and my argument was it was all these different things that he was doing, the traveling and the satire and all these different studies that made him that great of a writer, right? If he just focused on writing in one way, like he did, with novels later in life, even his study of dialect and dialogues, amazing his breadth of knowledge and experience. I forget the original question at this point. Oh, famous people versus
Yeah.
So even though I wanted to ring some bells of some people everyone would know, I really wanted to highlight that there's various levels of success that can be attained, and a lot of people, even outside of business and entrepreneurship, even in your career, being a generalist is probably the one thing that you should be focusing on to catapult yourself to success. So our friend John Reed, for example, he's in corporate communications, and he's been able to really kind of ascend the ranks, not because he's better at the one thing that everybody else does, but because he can do other things on top of it. So, he was in copywriting, but then he was also the guy that could do audio and video. And because he had those other skills, he was able to kind of climb up that ladder, whereas everyone else who was just focused on being a better copywriter got stuck, because everyone was a better copywriter.
Yeah.
But then when he could add just a few others, and I didn't even have to be the best at those skills, right? But just enough that other people didn't have, that gave the kind of... So examples like that of people who may not be the most famous but have achieved success in other ways by focusing on generalizing rather than specializing, which is a snare that is easy to fall into, I think, especially in some type of corporate environment.
Well, trusted estates lawyers are by definition not famous, and that's what I do. So you're not allowed to say specialist in Pennsylvania, actually, because it's ethically prohibited. Because once you take the bar, you're a lawyer.
Yeah.
And there's no sub way of indicating like board certified orthopedic surgeon in the law. So, but what I do is ethically, I guess I could say, it's very narrowly focused on law and takes lots of very specific knowledge. However, what makes me good and unique, and I have 10,000 clients in my section of the firm, are all of these other things that you're describing. I grew up performing comedy and made money when I was in college and law school doing comedy and comedy clubs. That led me to speak as kind of an outlet for that piece of me.
It makes you personable.
Exactly.
Yes.
And I learned to, I learned to be an interrogator, so I learned to build rapport with people and get them to share information with me. Well, trust estates planning, if you can't get them to share the underlying information and the problems that their kids have and all this intimate stuff, it's going to be an inferior product.
It doesn't matter how much you know about that specialization, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I could just verify that as a person who's not allowed to say he's a specialist but focuses a very narrow area of practice, that it's all the other things that make me exceptional at that.
Yes, and that's exactly the types of things that I also want to highlight as much as possible. Is that it's not just the Mark Twains who achieved success with generalization.
I'm very excited to see this book.
Yeah,
I'll do. I have a big pile of those that I've been giving out. We're pointing at the Jocko book, which I just want to go on the record as saying before we got on live, you were poking some fun at that. I didn't send a text or anything.
Are we gonna go to Jocko's gym when we're out in San Diego?
We're going.
I might be sick that day.
You're coming. I might be sick. And
You'll
to
be with
TNC.
Oh yeah, I will. Yeah,
You're gonna have to come.
all right. Well, we'll just.
You'll get into your whole discipline fatigue thing.
Yeah, we'll make sure this airs much later than that. Then. Yeah.
So number 3, there's a whole piece on why you do charitable work or nonprofit work and things like that. But this piece, this goes further. He said, do work that provides more value to others. He did not actually mean it just in the context of giving to charity.
Yeah.
I think he means what he said here. And so my view is, when we're thinking about who it is that we want to help, and we really understand their fears and their concerns and what causes anxiety and what they want more of and the problems they know and need to solve, when we figure out, okay, we can bring value to them by fixing this, solving this, giving them insight into this, and we do things that produces more value. So like every time I sit down and I say, I want to raise my prices, because so the fact that my overhead goes up all the time forces me to be better. I have to sit down and say, I'm not just, and this is what the mistake most people make, I'm just going to charge more money because I have more expenses. Well, unless you figure out a way to give more value, why would I go to you when you're charging more money? So I'm constantly sitting down and asking myself this question. Who is it that I really serve? And what is it they really need? And what is it that I could do for them that would bring so much more value that even if I increase my price, they would happily pay me? So I really liked this. That's how that is helpful to me. Can you think of, I think you're describing to everybody your process in doing that in how you're describing going about writing this book.
Well, for me, a big part, and I think this is universally established, a big part of a happy life is feeling like you have some type of meaning to it or purpose, and maybe that's what he's driving at. So this book, fortunately has now tied into larger projects that Sam and I are working on together. But originally it started out as really just a passion project. Like, this was just something I wanted to get out into the world to provide value. As anybody who's in the publishing industry knows, you don't really make money off of books generally. At least not in traditional publishing. If you're self-publishing, it's a little bit different. So it was coming from this idea of, all right, I have this idea, I'm very passionate about it. So for anybody who isn't familiar with me, I'm in the fitness space. That's where I make my money, and this is not a fitness book. So I didn't really have what we call a back-end tie-in to this thing. Like, this isn't a fitness book, so it's not going to lead back to kettlebell stuff, even though I talk about kettlebells in here. So I don't want to say it was a work of charity. I'm still getting paid for it. But there was certainly an element of that in me where I really felt like this is something I need to talk about, I need to get out. I think it's important. I think it is going to provide a ton of value to people's lives. And then since then, just through brainstorming with Sam and some other ideas, we have figured out a process or where this book is going to lead. But from its origin, it really started out as something that I just felt compelled I needed to write and get out there just because.
So I don't want to lose. There's a couple things. Sam,
Yeah.
I want to come to you, but I don't want to lose there. There was a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
One is you had passion about this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Two is that passion was driving you to do something where you did think a lot about bringing your view of this to other people because you thought it would enrich their lives.
Yes. And with no immediate sense of how that would be returned to
To
me.
you,
Yes.
yeah. And that didn't matter because
Yeah.
the passion was driving it. However, so let's stop there for a second. You didn't stop there. You then said, and this is really important because most people don't realize this, people who build real financial wealth, a lot of times are doing just what you're describing, but they don't stop there, nor did you. They figure out, okay, how do I best monetize this on the back end? Because that's where the money is.
Yeah.
Like, I have had books in both from another publisher and self-published in Barnes & Noble, Borders. You know, in the old days, you go, you do the events, 35 people show up. You think that's horrible. They think that's the largest turnout they've ever seen. But
Yeah.
what did you sell? 40 books?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
when I sell a book, when one of my Language of Parody books sells at Barnes & Noble, I think I get, like, really in my pocket, like $1 or something.
Yeah.
Sounds about right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not really sure, which is probably bad business, but it isn't how we make money. How I use that book, how I sell it directly, how I use it to show that I have expertise in an area, how I have an upsell for people that buy that book. Those are all the ways that real margin is made.
Yes. Yeah, you know, I think for anybody who doesn't have that experience, there's often this falsehood about publishing, and they assume that if you're published, like things must be wonderful, right? But they can be if you use publishing in the right way, which is really just a lead-in.
Well, even our advances, you get an advance. I mean, we don't need to talk about the advance on your book.
Yep.
But your advance plus what you sell is not going to ever meet what most people think is happening.
Yeah, I would never advise just trying to make money. And this comes back to being a generalist, right?
Yep.
I would
Yeah.
not specialize in writing books for a living at all. It just, even if you could make it, what you're leaving on the table is
so much more.
so much more. So, you know, again, we could do a whole episode on how to best use a book. As you know, for me, it's just another.
Producer Leslie, put that down.
Write it down.
There's another Pat Flynn episode.
Yeah.
Because we've all done it. You have a book, right? You have a book?
I don't have a book.
Oh, we've got to solve that.
I love how you asked me to do it and Alexa responded.
Yeah, Alexa was like,
Yeah.
She's
Alexa's
like,
got
no,
it.
I think I'll be your assistant.
yeah, this producer Leslie, she's very competitive with
She
other
is.
women, and she'll listen to me, and then Robin will say, you know, like, Alexa, do this or that. I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're saying.
Google does the same thing because I have Google Home and we always joke around about how sexist it is.
It is sexist.
And I think they use male voices for the testing.
Oh.
Because more than female voices, because it just my sister-in-law and I never picks us up, and then my husband has to ask her for. So I'm like, I feel like really bad about this.
Or it could be programmed in particular parts of the world. I don't want to, you know, get
Why
get
are
in
you
trouble.
looking at me?
Pat hasn't been here for one of our, like, where we go totally off the rails.
Totally
I
off
just,
Like,
yeah.
black skin, white skin stuff gets tossed around.
I don't want to. I mean,
You don't want to be here for that.
Well, I don't want to get myself in
Well,
any
we're
trouble. Yeah.
like Sam and I are demonstrating when we do it, though, how beautiful it could be.
Yes. Of course.
Sometimes we don't like kiss afterwards, but
No.
no.
Just sometimes.
But it's
There's like
glorious.
a hug.
Yeah, there's an embrace of
There's
some
an
sort.
embrace, yeah. It's just a shove.
I mean, and part of the fun is knowing how horribly badly it can go.
Both Sam and I have a sense of humor that's not viewed as entirely appropriate by large segments of society. And the problem is that there are lots of people like us probably that enjoy these sorts of things, but
I think it's most people.
Yes,
to be
it is.
honest.
It's
I
most
think it's
people.
most people.
But that they have the common sense, I guess you would call it.
Yeah.
to,
Sure.
Like just
The
mask
filter.
it a little bit.
Yeah.
They're not masking racism, by the way. They're masking like humor and pleasure.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Because God forbid we'd be too happy with one another.
Shouldn't have that.
So
I guess it
Leslie
depends who
burst
you're
out
with.
laughing at something that's on the screen. Who do we have?
Oh, it's just laughing at Steve because when you guys were talking about kissing, he goes, "Then there's the fist bump."
Oh, Steve, then let's try that. Let's try it, Sam. See, not as fulfilling as
No,
the embrace, but let me try it with you, Pat. So,
It's a
just
little
say,
awkward, but
yeah, back to fist bump.
it's like how my kid punches.
We're working on that.
Yeah,
Well,
we are. Yeah, he's doing
Josh,
Taekwondo now. Yep.
Remember Josh's rubbery front punch? Yeah. All right, here we go. 4.
Moving on.
Charlie Munger.
Back
We would
to
promise
the
that we
guy
would.
nobody knows.
Nobody knows, but we're gonna make sure they do.
Dana says that Sam's so cool that he could just think about writing a book and it would happen.
Well, we're gonna fix that for
Yeah,
you,
we'll
Sam.
make it happen.
Yeah.
Yes.
It will be a very small advance.
Yeah.
We'll do a Kickstarter. Yeah.
Yeah,
I know somebody who had tremendous success with a Kickstarter campaign for their initial book. Tremendous
oh, good.
success.
That's another.
which is
that's
interesting
another
'cause it's
show
a-
we're doing, and
We are doing that.
It's
show,
a way
yeah.
to market test your book idea,
Right.
really,
Yep.
before it comes
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
Is let the public give you your
Should I
advance.
tell Alexa to put that on the to-do list, or you got
It's on the to-do list.
Yeah.
Alexa, just backstop Leslie on that.
She can fight me for it.
I'm not quite sure how to help you with that.
She's responding. So this Charlie Munger guy, Munger has an amazing willingness to change his mind and a willingness and eagerness to acknowledge and learn from his own mistakes. I've got a quote here. Warren and I are very good at destroying our own best-loved ideas. So I refer to this as the killing the babies thing.
Yep.
Dana will recall, I think she was on a call one time where I expressed that for the first time. This is many years ago,
Yeah.
maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And I said, what you have to do is kill the babies, because we fall in love with these ideas that are no longer, that either were never successful from the start or are no longer successful because of changes
Yeah.
in the environment.
Zach Stone's also on. He just came.
Hey,
Oh, Zach.
Zach,
Yeah.
welcome, brother Zach. Excellent.
Dana says, "I love killing babies."
I really have, I think, achieved something
Yeah.
with this. Yeah. So, thoughts on that, Sam? Let's start with you.
Yeah, I mean, that is, we're talking about killing babies now, right?
Yeah, killing babies or your own best loved ideas,
Yeah,
as Charlie Munger put it.
I mean,
more
we
gently.
were kind of talking about this actually on the drive over about,
Can we record that your drives over from now on too?
Well, pre-show, yeah.
Yeah, we probably should.
Yeah.
Yeah. That idea of the worth of college, and we're saying like hopefully by the time our kids are old enough, they won't need to go to college anymore, and that model will have changed because it's just getting so expensive. But there is a section of people that have paid a lot of money, and because whatever it is, maybe it's college, maybe it's something else, because you spent time and money on it, you've convinced yourself that that was a good decision or it was a worthy mistake, so to speak. And I think part of being able to let go and pivot or change direction is the overproduction. So I see it all the time as people are too specialized in making one
So
track.
They can't pivot.
They have nothing to pivot to. Whereas if you have 10 things going, and we've said how this can be a bad thing as well, but if you have multiple things going and you constantly have the ability to grow new plants, then letting one go becomes much easier because you're much less attached to it, and you have the redundancy of having 9 other things going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of it I think can often lead to you trying to do the square peg in a round hole type of thing, and this is very true in writing specifically. I mean, for anything that I do, in this book included, there's a lot of leads or first drafts that I absolutely fell in love with, but then ultimately didn't fit with the general structure of the book. And that's a very difficult thing to do, is to be able to kill that baby and see, like, it just doesn't work. Like, it's great by itself in isolation, but it's not serving the overall purpose. And what can happen is people can get so emotionally attached, and this applies everywhere, not just writing, to whatever that baby is. that they're constantly trying to force it to work, but it doesn't work. And if they would just be willing to let go of that idea, or even just put it away for a while. So you don't even have to kill it. So sometimes what I'll do with writing is like, I like this. I don't want to kill it. I'm going to copy it and paste it, and I'm just going to put it away somewhere.
That's brilliant, because your brain goes, okay, I've got access to it if I need it. For that reason, I'm willing to move on.
But it lets me move forward and more towards the cohesive whole. And then 99.9% of the time, that thing just goes away anyways. And I have these graveyard documents of all these babies that just really didn't make it or really didn't fit into anywhere. So that's kind of my little...
Creating those things along the way that maybe they're filed away or thrown away are still part of the process to getting to, at least the first finished product.
Sure.
Yeah,
right.
it's all refinement is really what it is, yeah.
So in the email that I sent you and Sam preparing for today, one of the things I mentioned was that if this show has anything, it's apparent contradiction that causes people to really think about things. And there's been a lot of that there, which is we want you to be prolific with ideas, but if you spread your attention among too many ideas, you're not going to drive anything to completion. Mm-hmm. But this is where Pat's model and Charlie's model come in again. Create all these ideas, become a specialist in cultivating the ones that you think first are going to be most synergistic to your life or your business. Mm-hmm. And if they fail, don't worry, you've got tons more.
Yes.
And create systems that maintain the momentum that when you have multiple things going, they keep going.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
You burst out in uproarious laughter, so we missed something by someone that was worthy of comment, I think.
I'm just laughing. Michael Halbfish.
Oh, Michael Halbfish.
It has been on, and he's just making really funny comments.
He is very
over and
funny.
over again. He was
And
just
this is
talking
proof. Michael has proof that we know one another. We are going to get Michael in the show, too, and I'm going to make sure that you're here for that as well, so you two can meet, because that's like packing a lot of plutonium into a box.
Yeah.
And then just adding that little bit more plutonium for critical mass.
Yeah. Well, Michael's great. Michael, or does he live in PA?
No, he probably doesn't want me to say where he lives, but he's close to PA.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we talk on Facebook every now and he's given some great recommendations for my podcast, some guests, and I had a few people. And then I asked him if he listened to it. He didn't even listen to it. So,
he does.
Like,
listen to
I
you,
owe him
though.
the link.
He
Yeah, I owe
watches
the link. He had me bring on a guy named Gary Lockman onto my show, who was the former bassist of the band Blondie. But then
I heard that
did
show.
a huge pivot and just decided he was going to start contemplating the nature of reality and consciousness and all this. Absolutely
That was a fascinating show.
Fascinating conversation, and that was one where I really couldn't keep up, but fortunately he was able to maintain the pace of the show because I was just so unfamiliar with that way of looking at things. But that's part of generalism, right? Is inviting all these different ideas in and these different perspectives, from whether it's business or the nature of reality, right? Like making sure you're evaluating all these different perspectives, and you can weigh them out and use them where they're useful, discard them where they're not. So anyways, that's just a quick shout out that was probably the most interesting episode I had.
It really was.
It wasn't the most downloaded by any means, because I think most people, it probably has somewhat limited appeal, but personally, it was a very interesting conversation for me.
Well, Michael, welcome. Great having you on the
Yeah.
show. He is an awesome guy and very much in line with what we're talking about today from Charlie Munger and from you. Mm-hmm. So just under the category of with each of these, you've noticed I'm going back to how does this help us? What do we do? So Munger notes that he and Warren look at old ideas as less functional tools. Mm-hmm. Tools that have been refined since then or improved upon. And he asks why, if you could have a better, newer, more powerful, more useful, more effective tool, wouldn't you reject the old one? So I think that's a really good way of looking at this too. He also cites,
that's interesting. I would like some context with that, because I think there's old tools that work really well in some situations better than new tools.
Sure, that's true. And
I,
sometimes we like old tools for the aesthetics of them as well.
Yes.
But don't confuse the two of effectiveness. So I don't think he would disagree with you.
Yeah.
I think he's saying we have to examine the effectiveness, and when we get one that's more effective, there may be a situation in which the old tool is more effective.
For example, the immediate thing that comes to mind is people possibly trying to replace the new tool of science with the old one of philosophy. I would say that's a mistake in many regards, and that both are still very useful tools, but they can be used for solving different problems.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
So he's got a John Kenneth Galbraith quote there: faced with the choice between changing one's mind and proving there's no need to do so, almost everyone gets busy on the proof.
Right.
And this is going to the Ray Dalio book, which we've given you guys the link for, because Ray Dalio went from being sure he was right about something, which resulted in his sort of public disgrace and real failure almost in his business, to asking a different question, which is, how do I know if I'm wrong? And being much more willing to challenge ideas.
Which is not a natural way to think
It
at
is
all.
not.
I mean, that is about as counterintuitive as it can get. Most people are seeking out the confirmation bias and looking for ways that they're right. And really what he's saying is he's trying to do what scientists do in a very, very, very narrow field of interest throughout his whole life. I think that statement, the magnitude of what he just said, it would be enormously difficult to do on the day-to-day. I don't think anybody could probably do it, but even if you maybe do it just 10%.
So this goes to the idea of having a system or a discipline in place
Yeah.
that's going to help you to do that. So periodically you're going to go do it and bite the bullet and take all the strength it needs to do it.
Yes, yeah. I just think that I think he's right. I think it's incredibly powerful. I just think it'd be also incredibly difficult to do.
It would be. I would say this, that OODA loop, which is Colonel Boyd, and we've done a whole show on that, so we can put the link in the show notes there, which it isn't right now. But this idea that if we can go back through and reevaluate tools that we were at one time using and how the environment has changed, even if we just do that occasionally, we're going to be way ahead of the competition and life's going to be better because we're going to be more adaptive to what's going on. So I admit, super hard to do. We're not really built to do it. But to the extent we can either create systems that remind us to do it, or we can otherwise build a discipline of doing it, even occasionally you'll get a way better result. This is one that appeals more to me than to you guys probably, but I think it has a place for people of all ages. Munger, I've noticed one of the patterns in things he's talking about is he's constantly praising old age. And this he wrote this before he was, he wrote this many years ago. So he had entered probably later midlife, I think, when he wrote this, or when it was
He was
compiled.
only 82 when he wrote this.
But he talks about it in the context of saying, I think every human is best served by making it a goal to be constantly improving, to staying physically fit, to improving the mind, to adapting to what's going on around you, till you die.
Yeah.
Like, you're not just going to do it so that it'll benefit you, but that you'll be for some period of time, you're going to be most benefited yourself by just saying, till I keel over, I'm going to read books, I'm going to do this, I'm going to take up sport.
I mean that definitely resonates with me for sure. I mean that is being on the path to mastery, right? Is enjoying the process, practice for the sake of practice itself and learning for the sake of learning itself, not necessarily for any result or outcome that you may get, because at the end of the timeline we're all dead anyway.
I think we talked about that last episode a little bit, didn't we? Of the importance of staying in process, appreciating the process, rather than identifying, or at least overly identifying with an outcome.
Yes, because a lot of times the outcome becomes something other than what you originally conceived of it as being. Because if you have the thing that you want and the why you're going there, and you remain open, you're driven toward this thing, but you remain open to something better might come along.
Yeah.
That's a difficult balance too. We're not built that way as humans, but that is a skill that I've cultivated, and that allows you to make a pivot or a little divergence that often gets you to a way better outcome. I find this too. This goes to leadership. My organizational skills have grown, and as I've been much better at getting people much more involved earlier on in clarifying what it is that we want to do and the why, that a lot of times that collaborative effort is better than what it would have been with just me. And the thing is, we're going to get there faster because everybody has a dog in the hunt now. So, I just think we've given the answer to how does that apply to us, which is that at whatever age you are, having clarity about that is sort of liberating. Let's see where we're going here. Number 6, biologist Julian Huxley, life is just one damn relatedness after another. Munger believes you must have the models to see the relatedness of many, many different things and the effects and the effects of that relatedness. And so he's applying this thing. So Munger puts it this way: you need a system of multiple mental models. Pat Flynn again on multidiscipline versus specialization, and the two of us are multidisciplinary education, we can kind of relate to this.
Yeah.
So he is what he calls models.
Yeah.
You're really calling skill sets. It's more than just a mental model to him, but he does construct these elaborate mental models. For example, in how he applies it, you observe this narrowly in business, selecting companies. We're going to get to some of that. But one of the other things he said later is, I can't just give you one formula. I have lots of mental models, and when I'm looking at this particular industry and this particular company, I'm going to pull in different mental models too.
Well, it's we've seen this in our experience with martial arts. Is the same question is how do I defeat my opponent? The Koreans answered it a certain way. They said we're going to kick
them. Yeah.
And the boxer said we're going to punch him. And the grappler said we're going to take him down and choke him out. It's the same problem, and you have three different answers. So I think what he's getting at is you have to have these different models, these different doctrines to the approach of this problem, and then you'll get three different answers, and then guess what? There's some combination of the three that is the actual
or some
best.
situation where one of them on its
Correct.
own is the best answer.
Yes.
So good. That's
Yes.
a really brilliant way of putting it.
Yeah, or even probably more in his area is economics, right? I mean, there's many different economic models. So certainly the Keynesian model would be probably the prevailing model here, but there's also the Austrian model. And I think it's important to at least have an understanding of both. You might not use both to the same extent. In some situations, one may be more useful than the other. And really, one is more of a mathematical model, one is more of a logical model. And I couldn't really, and people will make this argument, I don't think it's a very good one, of why you would either want one or the other when you could just as easily have both.
And typically, we're using 2 or 3 models to evaluate a situation. The best outcome is when those models get you to the same result that you're looking for.
Well, and also, when we create the model with our own assumptions and biases, so, and then we use the model to make predictions, well, we already kind of pointed the ship before we let it go.
Right.
And that's the danger of only using one model. And then sometimes you go back in regressions and find, well, it's not just that this model matched the data. I got the same answer with this model even with random data. So there was something else going on in there.
And I think this is really why it's important to have mathematical models and philosophical models and logical models, because the philosophical and logical models will help you to interpret data, especially empirical data.
Right.
And you need, without a lens of how to interpret something, you may form the wrong conclusions. You may go down the wrong area. So if you're just looking at data, but you don't have any type of background, of logical or philosophical background through which you're trying to interpret it, I think at best you may miss some things.
Well, this gets us right into the Lollapalooza effect, which is Munger suggests that having numerous mental models is the best, and that when multiple models are combined, you get this Lollapalooza effect where there's more than synergy. This is the 1 + 1 + 1 = 7 or something. And I think what you're describing, Pat, is that having these multiple models means you have, generally speaking, we don't see the lens through which we're observing the data or the world, right? So we don't sort of realize our own bias. But having these mental models are like taking off one kind of glasses and looking at it through another type of glasses. If I could relate this to physics, we used to think that here was the world because that was the visible light spectrum.
Right.
Now we know that's only a tiny bit of the spectrum of waves in the universe. So there's this whole universe out there that we can only see because our eyes can't naturally see it by putting on spectacles, if you will. And so these multiple mental models that allow us to look at the same thing in different ways can show us aspects of it that when we understand all of them, make the result way better. So let's try to relate this to something actually in our businesses, in our lives. So for me, when I get certain KPIs in business, I'm looking at them through, like I constructed that KPI, as you observe, with a kind of a bias already.
Yep.
So when I go back and I look at it and I show it to other people who have a different perspective on it, they may give me more insights. I don't just accept that. I ask them, why do you say that? How did you come to that conclusion? What kind of data did you look at before? Is that business that you were looking at, that data like mine or different from mine? So I now have multiple ways of looking at the same data that could be very informative to me.
Yeah, I mean that's is something that we do as well. And when we're looking at, expanding or growing our organization in a certain way, we take we can make this investment doing this, or we can make the same investment doing that. And what's the ultimate goal, right? Is it just to expand for the sake of expansion, or is it to increase profits, or is it to somehow increase our reach and influence by teaching more students? And all of those different pieces then helps inform our decision of what we're going to do next.
Yeah, or even just take something simple like advertising. If you want to be the most effective advertiser, you not only have to understand data and numbers, you have to understand psychology. You should probably be a pretty decent copywriting. There's a lot of different, not only models, but skills that go into, we call it like a meta skill or something like that, like a skill that is really comprised of multiple other smaller skills or models.
Well, that's a perfect example. You got a guy that's a good copywriter, they'll probably get a good result. But if they understand testing, they're going to get a better result. If they're producing a direct response, at least for a certain category of business, they're going to get a better result yet.
Yeah.
And then if they understand Facebook advertising as opposed to merely A/B split testing, if their audience happens to be an audience that's looking at stuff on Facebook, they're going to get a better, and those synergies are going to be very powerful.
And there are specialists out there. There are people who know a lot about Facebook's out and setting up ads, but then they have gaps and they can't do it all themselves. And being a generalist is meaning you don't always have to do it all yourself, but you should at least have the capability that you could if you wanted to. And
you can evaluate
who else is doing the job,
for you.
in which we talked about before. Is like a good generalist is hard to bullshit because they know enough about.
Oh,
yeah. Is that our explicit rating?
Yeah.
There we go.
No, I'll edit it. He'll just get bleeped.
Yeah,
we won't lose it.
They're hard
you
to
won't
BS.
beat Katie though.
No.
We had a guest on women's fashion that used. Well, I don't know. Did we bleep labia?
We did. Now we're gonna have to bleep it again.
Yeah, but we bleeped lots of stuff with her.
Okay, good. So you only have one bleep to worry about with me.
Well, two now.
Yeah.
Well, no, and I had one too in an episode because I said a-hole.
Oh,
It's
nice.
tough. It's tough.
I like how we all have these something.
But I mean, just to give a small example,
I think it's brilliant that you were able to go right back to that. Go ahead.
Yeah. So with the company that we were talking about with Spencer and I, I don't have the bandwidth to do absolutely everything. So we brought on an ad guy, the original ad guy, and I told him straight up, I'm like, here's my numbers. Like, if you can't do at least as good as this, you're gone. 2 weeks, he's gone. And then we brought in another ad guy. So, like, if I didn't have that background as a generalist of knowing, like, what is good or what is quality, then I wouldn't really have a frame of reference to kind of evaluate this person, right? It's easy to be taken advantage of if I call it the ignorance premium. A generalist doesn't pay an ignorance premium because they're not ignorant on these things. But again, at the same time, just because you can do everything, it doesn't necessarily mean that you should.
No, it'll probably hold you back.
Yeah, it'll probably hold you back. But by being a short-term specialist and getting your scope in certain areas, you also discover not only what you're best at, but what you enjoy doing the most. And in your business,
so
where you want to put
ultimately,
that
it
in.
enables you to build a stronger team of specialists because you're the generalist.
That's fundamentally it. So I don't do everything in my business or the one that I'm doing with Spencer or the new stuff that we're starting either, but I could, right? But I certainly could. And same thing with you and the gym. Like you could do anything. I'm sure that happens in the gym. And you probably
and I do very, very little.
But you do very little of it fundamentally. Right?
Delegation.
Yeah.
Test.
So it makes you a better leader. Fundamentally, is what it comes down to.
So number 8, we're going long, right? Are we?
Yeah, we're long.
We're okay with you guys.
Yeah, fine.
But I think we should at least get to the number we promised them.
Which was what, 10?
Well, and remember, this is from the
12.
first 45 pages, and they're actually 13 because we have a reading list. So there was a bonus in there which we clearly didn't need to do, but it's in the show notes. They're really good. You got to check the show notes out. Let's pause for a second too, because this is the last show of the month, so we're going to pick some winners. So could you hand me that Echo Dot?
There's a lot of people to choose from today, too. We had a good audience.
Yeah, so we're going to ask you a favor, but we're also going to reward you. Hope you were rewarded with a great show. I knew this would be a fantastic show. But if you want to bring the NSA right into your home to be able to listen to you, but also to have
How nice of you! Just come on in.
There's a certain convenience to having this too. You can order things You can you can do a to-do list. You can do your grocery list. I mean, it's fabulous.
If you're a woman, you can feel like you're back in time.
Yeah, you can feel like you're in a male-dominated society that has existed since '62. Not that I was longing for that. That came out sounding wrong. I do remember as a kid seeing things where I thought, like, really? And then by the time I got involved in it, it wasn't true anymore.
Yeah.
So I didn't have to make hard choices. The Echo Dot, though, we are going to award this to a randomly selected person. So here's the favorite part. If you go to iTunes and just give us a 5-star. I sometimes say any rating, but then you
There's an implicit.
you're not going to go there and be dirty.
Yeah.
Like some kind of an animal, like a savage. So you can rate us. You can actually write a review. I think we should give people 2 when they write a review.
Okay.
Give you 2 entries. And then, or you can share, right? Anybody that shares this. All you have to do to be entered is to message in top form.
Yep.
Producer Leslie will see them, and then sometime in November we'll pull them off. But we have some other prizes for you guys.
Also, they can subscribe to YouTube.
Yeah, subscribe to YouTube. Oh, thank you very much. YouTube is live.
Yeah.
So, in fact, we'll give you 2 entries for doing that one. We have some amazing tactical flashlights, which I realized I wasn't showing everybody before.
That's not the one from last week, is it?
No, it is actually. I fixed it.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So these are very sturdy. We have one from one of our sponsors, and so we're going to give away one of those. So you'll also be entered to win that. And then, even though I risk Pat's wrath here by trotting this bad boy out.
I feel like I have to. I like Jock. The little thing. I think Jocko.
Your protest has been noted.
Yeah, I think Jocko is probably a great example of a generalist in many regards.
Is.
The only thing I was laughing at is it seems like he can apparently write the Nike slogan in about 40 different ways and turn it into a book.
Which is its own skill.
Which is its own skill. It is. I thought it was a little bit funny.
Well,
but it is
building the home gym.
It is a great book. It certainly is. And I'm admiring the cover.
The cover
is very cool.
Spectacular.
Very cool.
So this is not Extreme Ownership. This is the new field manual.
Yep.
Great little book. And we have one of these to give away, too. And we have Ferris's book, Tools of Titans. We have 1 copy left. So for everybody that did these things and lets us know in October, and then we'll have a whole new set of prizes for you to give away in November. So if you share this episode right here, or you go to YouTube, can you share in YouTube?
Yeah, you can share on YouTube.
Share it in YouTube. Subscribe. That would be subscribing to the podcast or to the YouTube will be hugely beneficial to us. So we're going to enter you to win all of that. Also, we just got done. Pat couldn't make it this year, but I think you're going to try to come next year.
To the
Business Black
Business
Ops.
yes, I would love to.
And you'll bring Dr. Spencer Nadowski,
Certainly will.
and who I'm assuming will not wear a shirt.
It's hard to find him with a shirt on.
Yeah.
It is.
And I understand why. I mean, I'm a devoutly heterosexual man. I don't judge anybody else. I love that everybody finds love. But I felt like a little stirring. Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, under the small world category, I was having lunch with Spencer Nadowski at a Tim Ferriss thing in Boulder, Colorado. And the good doc lives, can we say where he lives?
Yeah.
He lives in Baltimore. So
No, not Baltimore. He's in Maryland.
Well, Baltimore's
Well, not
but not proper Baltimore.
not
Yeah,
proper
you're right.
Baltimore,
You're right.
Yeah.
I didn't want to get too close.
Yeah.
Because
I can have his address. So you want me to?
Well, we did almost give away Steve Richardson's exact location at one time.
It's within a 3-mile radius that we gave away his location.
So I meet Spencer. I'm having lunch, and he looks at his phone, which I guess revealed that I was not a stellar lunch companion. And he goes, "This is hilarious." And he holds it up, and he has a text from you. He's texted you and says, "I'm having lunch with Dave Freese." And you go, "I know Dave Freese. We're buddies." Which Michael Halfish now knows that we know one another.
Small world.
Small
It
world.
Well,
really
yeah,
is.
he apparently suggested you for his show.
Yes.
Well, we're on it.
Yeah.
We're going to record a Pat Flynn show after this. So Pat,
This would
promote-
probably be a good episode to actually just repost on.
Yeah, we could do
So I
that.
think I'll
Sure.
at least do that until we do our own.
Or you may want to cut it into like 3 episodes the way we're going now.
Yeah. Well, people, my podcast is eclectic in length, but
Yes.
people do seem to enjoy the longer, deeper conversations as well. They also like the commuter size
Yep.
episodes
Yeah.
here and there, but yeah.
I do too. I like both styles, and I'm not afraid to have both of them either. So.
Some topics just really need more time to discuss. They
Yeah.
do. It's
Steve
just-
Richardson says he has an Echo Dot, so everybody kind of already knows where he lives.
Oh yeah, I get right from my buddies at NSA. I get the transcripts from
Yeah.
Steve's, so it's nice. Now I tell you, we're going to finish strong. We've got Munger on patience, and I'm a believer that if you have infinite patience, you get instant gratification.
Mm-hmm.
I have found I'm way happier having overcome my need for immediate resolution of things. So again, here's one where we're going to say 2 contradictory things. Driving to resolution, getting it over the finish line, very important. Having some patience so that you don't have to drive it all the time, immediately over the finish line, very important. So Sam and I are forever doing this to our audience.
Yeah.
And then they write things like, which is it?
I think the answer to most things in life is somewhere between 2 contradicting ideas.
It is.
It really is. We were joking yesterday at the gym because Sam was making fun of me for my severe lack of patience in some regards. Because I was upset that the iPhone X because I didn't get in early enough. Now I have to wait till like January to get one. So I'm like, well, do I go get an iPhone 8 or this or that? And he was making fun of me for like buying a St. Bernard the moment I wanted a St. Bernard. And things like that. But another,
The moment. He's like,
I gotta go. I gotta go, Sam. Come back.
Got up off the mat.
Yeah.
You were rolling at the time.
And so, and some things too, like when I want to get something done, I'm driving towards getting that thing done. But then on the other hand, we'll sit here and talk about how important it is to just stay in process and enjoy the process. So contradicting ideas to an extent, but somewhere between them is the truth.
Yeah,
right?
and the St. Bernard one's a good example. Had you not immediately passed guard and got up and left to get a fully grown male St. Bernard.
puppy, yeah.
Well, so you obviously thought it out a little bit more in the car.
Well, yeah, hardly.
No, but I mean, sometimes there is merit in patience because a better version of the idea comes along when you discipline yourself. But there's no question that the answer is that on the patience to total impatience scale, it's not in the same place for every decision that you make.
I think also like some clarity is what we're talking about. Patience is not sitting around and waiting for things to happen.
Right.
That's not patience. That's just idleness. Right.
And the two are often confused.
Yeah.
Well, Munger, like Warren Buffett, makes very large bets and typically holds the position for a very long time, to put it in the context of where they're working. And Charlie calls it sit on your ass investing insights into, and that it has many benefits. He says you pay less to brokers because you're not trading all the time. You're listening to less nonsense. I think he means from brokers and analysts.
Yep.
If it works, the tax system gives you an extra benefit for long-term capital gain versus short-term capital gain. So the importance he notes is the art of patience and the art of waiting without tiring of waiting. That's what you're talking about. You're doing things, then you have to wait for things to happen before you're going to take or do the next step. So waiting also has application when you're taking the time to evaluate the very best options. This is what I was talking about. And taking only those options where success is most likely and failure is always possible, but it's less likely. So sometimes you do need patience to sort of wait till you get all the data to see. Like in his case, he's buying a company. And he makes a remark later in the book, how do I know if the bargain is a bargain because it's a good buy or it's a bargain because of the wrong reasons?
Right.
So sometimes it takes a little patience to figure out which
And we've talked about this in hiring people. It's very easy to get in the trap of taking the best person available.
Yes.
Rather than having the patience
Yes.
to find the best person for that role or for the team.
And that takes some leadership because when you've lost a person or you've grown and you need one, the team is taking it on the chin for a while.
Yeah.
But typically they're going to be happier too when you exercise that little bit of self-discipline. So how does this help us and how can we use this idea? So Buffett actually had an example which Munger reports. And he said, what if you had a ticket and only had 20 spots on it and you punched one each time you made an investment? That's it. in life you can only make 20 investments. Would you be more careful and
Yeah.
would you be more patient about getting the thing punched? The answer is, if you weren't patient with it the first few times, you would either be broke or build more value by becoming more patient. I think.
Yeah.
Munger on how and where he operates. So this is another one rife with apparent contradiction, because we're all of us are constantly getting outside of our comfort zone and becoming temporary specialists and doing things we didn't know how to do before because we think it makes us grow very significantly as human beings. Munger, on the other hand, says move only when you have an advantage. It's very basic. After that, understand the odds and have the discipline to bet only when the odds are strongly in your favor. I don't know if I have these the right order. We just keep our heads down and handle the headwinds and the tailwinds as best we can. So if we have a strength, it's in recognizing that we're operating well within the circle of our competence and when we're approaching the perimeter. Quote, if you have a competency, pretty much know its boundaries. If you have a competency, you pretty much know its boundaries already. He says, I'm no genius. I'm smart in spots, and I stay around those spots. So two contradictory things. Don't we want that zone of competence to grow, which means we have to go outside.
Yep.
Yes.
And we know and we feel that, and there's fear and there's anxiety. I don't think he's really contradicting this. I think he's saying when you're making your big bets, work where you really know.
Yeah.
Don't make your big bets outside of your zone of
Well,
competence.
and I think that relates to what he was saying before. So what, I guess it was Buffett that gave the example of the ticket, right?
Yep,
The
yep.
20 tickets is, we're not going through everything saying, well, we only have 20 choices to make for every decision,
Right.
in the rest of our life. But he's created a model to say, okay, before we make this decision, let's evaluate it in that really tight framework that we only have 20 chances to get this right.
Yep.
Then you remove those 20 chances, and you have infinite chances. So it's like, as we're going through, is constraining yourself when the stakes are very high and saying, all right, I know I can be hyper confident within this sphere, but over time we're going to expand that sphere by going outside of it, bringing in other outside expertise with having our own base level expertise to evaluate its quality.
So a perfect example I could give is I developed a fairly high level of expertise in real estate investing when I was pretty young. My dad did it. I started to represent people who were really good at it. I modeled what they did. I listened to them, and I was good at it. And then I had made some money, so I thought, like, well, I'll invest in some startup companies. And they would crash with a ferocity and burn on the runway like with a hot white heat. So then I was like, well, so I'm making big bets outside of my expertise. Let me make smaller bets. And miraculously, all these people that told me, oh, you need $100,000 to make this bet would take $10,000.
Right.
And or I could put together people who are. And then the other thing I did was I'm outside of my expertise, so I started to consult people who had made these bets successfully in the past, and they told me something that made sense. Like picking real estate meant you made all your money on the buy. You had to buy it right.
Yep.
Picking a successful startup meant you had to diversify a lot because there were so many failures.
Right.
But the one that was successful would not be a 10-to-1; it would be a 2,000-to-1.
Right.
And so that's an important lesson there. So I think our view of constantly expanding the zone and operating outside the zone of comfort is not contradictory of this at all.
Right.
No, I think it just requires context is the only thing. Yes, if you've got to make a big bet, then best to stay within the realm that you are best at. But at the same time, not everything in life is a huge bet.
Right. Sometimes they're small ones, and
Yeah.
the small ones are where we get outside the comfort
Yes.
zone and expand it. So Munger's effect on Buffett. This is a Buffett quote. Charlie shoved me in the direction of not just buying bargains, as Ben Graham had taught me. This was the real impact Charlie had on me. It took a powerful force to move me from Graham's limiting views. It was the power of Charlie's mind. He expanded my horizons. So this got them not just to buy stuff they thought was a bargain, but to buy stuff that they thought was on a gigantic trajectory, which is a different kind of bet, and which has played out many times for Buffett. Warren Buffett reflects on Charlie Munger's 3 great lessons of investing. So here's Charlie Munger's 3 great lessons of investing. A great business at a fair price is superior to a fair business at a great price. Number 2, a great business at a fair price is far superior to a fair business at a great price. And number 3, miraculously the same. So Pretty interesting, I thought. Here we go. We're on the home stretch now. Oh, yeah, here's some amazing Munger questions before we go on to the next one. Okay, here we go. Amazing Munger questions. If it's cheap enough to buy, is it cheap for the right or the wrong reason?
Right.
What's the flip side? So cheap always has a flip side. And what could go wrong with this thing that I've never seen before? So typically we think instinctively, well, here's the things that could go wrong. I could live with those. But he's asking a different question. Let's pause and think about what could go wrong that we've never really seen before here. So sometimes those things are invisible to us because we just don't have a good mental model. But that's what comes from being very good at lots of different things, is you can start to pull in things about failure and problems from other areas and apply them to this, and you're more likely to detect problems.
Well, it's that idea of expanding your sphere of competence is ultimately we don't know what we don't know, and he may now know the things he doesn't know and won't make decisions in those areas.
Force of competitive destruction. So he notes that of the 50 most important stocks listed on the New York Stock Exchange in 1911, and I think there are even better statistics on this, only one remains in business today. So what do you do about that? I mean, what he's really saying, this is coming, again, just from Darwin, and we've alluded to it a number of times before. Yeah. You better be prolific, and that's why what you were talking about, I have this idea, it doesn't fit here, I'm not going to kill it, but I'm going to keep it here. Because in a different environment, in a different context, that could be exactly the idea that you need. So you want to be prolific, and you want to recognize when something is failing to work because of change in the environment, and you got to pivot, change direction, or kill it off and let something else thrive. That takes a system of going back and examining. What are the main things? What are the profit margins of each thing I'm selling? How many of them am I selling? What's the trajectory? Because the thing that sold the most doesn't sell anymore.
Right.
You don't want to be caught without something that can replace that. And then the final one, and then we'll give the book recommendations. There's no perfect formula, and I alluded to this earlier. You need a different checklist and a different mental model or multiple mental models for different companies. I can never make it easy for my students by saying, here are the 3 things. You have to derive it yourself to ingrain it in your head for the rest of your life. So how does this apply to us?
I think it applies to everything, and from creating so you have sales funnel here.
Yep.
If there was a perfect formula to sales funnel, everybody would have one. Everyone would be profitable, right? So it's not that. If there was a perfect formula to writing the next great American novel, everybody would have the next great American novel. I think pretty much anything that is really worthwhile is at least just as much an art, if not more of an art, than a science in most cases, and this is particularly true for most of the skills that go into building a business.
I like to think of it as art informed by science. So there's this art. So here's, like you observed that I had sales funnels out as an example. So we should be thinking about who are we selling to? So we know some of the biases that they're going to use in making decisions. How do they make decisions? Where do they get their information? Who else is talking to them? Who's telling them things that might be contrary to what we're saying, which creates objections that we have to overcome. What are their unique worries, desires, and ways of deciding things? Then you have to create a system for delivering that. I mean, there's so many moving parts to this. That's the art that you're talking about. Yep. You internally, by getting to know your market and developing products for them, you internally have a sense of where to go. But you got to test that. Yeah,
and there's a lot of people who know the science and can write books on the science of sales psychology and sales funnels, but then can't sell the book through a sales funnel.
Exactly. Well, Perry Marshall and I, back in the old days when we were talking together, he would do this exercise with the audience where he would show them ads, and these were all pretty savvy marketers, and then ask them to say which one outperformed the other in A/B split testing.
Yeah.
Very rarely could a majority of people agree on which one it was, and often the majority was wrong. So our intuition's probably good, but especially when we're going into something new market, new audience, new type of product, you gotta test. So we're about done. So who else do we need to say thank you to? We've thanked Michael. We've thanked Steve.
Lisa's on.
Lisa, thank you.
Also, Katie Harper's on.
Katie, was she on when we played an homage to Katie?
No, she missed it.
Oh, Katie, we had an homage to you.
She just joined us.
We mentioned the word that got bleeped again.
Yeah.
So thank you all. Let's just remind everybody before we do this last thing and close it out. that we would be very honored, especially if you enjoyed this, if you shared it with people. Let producer Leslie know just by messaging us that you did it. You will be entered to win the NSA-backed Echo Dot, the Discipline Equals Freedom Field Manual. I think we still have a Tim Ferriss one copy that we haven't sent out yet, or a tactical flashlight. So we've got a bunch of prizes, and we'll be picking those and probably maybe making some announcements over the next month while we offer our new prizes. So YouTube, the YouTube channel is up. Go subscribe, number one, and let us know because you're entered. And like some of those videos, that would be awesome. And share them. Yeah. So thank you. Pat.
Thank you.
We want to thank you for being on. That was exceptional. I knew this
Always
would be
a pleasure.
right up
Always
your alley.
fun. Always fun.
And Charlie Munger's recommended reading list. So this is going to be very interesting, I think. Guns, Germs, and Steel, The Fates of Human Societies. Mm-hmm. So he has only 3 books he's telling people to read here, which is sort of understanding how societies and systems grow, develop, and then die or perish without adaptation. The Selfish Gene, which is he's coming at it from how do you out-compete the competition? And then Darwin's Blind Spot, how you out-cooperate the competition, which was Darwin missed this whole piece of it, according to the author of this. So 3 great books. We have those. Can we put those links
They're already
up? They're already in. Awesome.
Wonderful.
And they'll be in the show notes, too, on iTunes. So, you guys, I had a fantastic time today. This is very selfish. Do you feel selfish when you do your show?
A little bit. This is when I do a solo episode more so than when I have guests.
It's so beneficial to how like Sam, you and I have talked about this.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
The way we develop and hone the thinking about things.
Oh, well, that's a big reason I started my podcast, was just so I could talk my book out. And because, I can do it through one perspective through writing. But again, talk about generalism, taking multiple perspectives on things, you often, by talking things out with other people, especially with you two guys who...
I think doing this has changed my voice as a writer.
Yeah.
I'd be curious if you find that too.
Yeah, so I think it's an extraordinary exercise for anybody who's doing any level of writing or teaching on anything to just get out there and start talking about it, because you'll approach it from a different angle. You'll find new ways of explaining it, often better ways of explaining it. So yes, it is a very selfish thing, but hopefully it's beneficial to listeners as well.
I'm sure you have this experience with your editor or not, which will reveal a lot about me, but editors are constantly coming back to me and saying, I understand what you're saying, but can you give me a different or better or clearer example? And doing this, I think, has really honed that piece of the writing. Like, I've been writing a lot more lately for publications that I'm submitting to or a regular contributor, and I just feel like the examples I'm using are way more developed because of this.
Yes, well, it's all that refining process, really, is we're just going through drafts as we talk. So.
Leslie has the expression of most of our viewers, which is, good Lord, I need to leave right after you pay me for a double show.
I was actually just thinking, oh, thank God the internet hasn't. It stayed with us today. It worked perfectly.
Yeah, by the way, fist bump producer Leslie, because we have all this technology that she's been progressively getting to play better and better and better together. And I think today was
pulled together,
100%.
For an hour and a half show, which is great.
Awesome.
Wow, we went super long. We've never gone so overboard before.
You know what though? All of our viewers seem to really like this, and they stayed on. So thank you.
That's what I found, is if you're talking about interesting things. I mean, when have you ever been interested in something and wanted to hear less of it? Right?
But the flip side is, I have gone to movies where about 2 minutes in, I knew that I could probably just take a nap.
Yeah, because you're not interested in it. Yeah. So it's the same thing. Like, if a podcast is too long, the problem for me isn't that it's too long. It's just not interesting enough.
Yeah. Would take blame.
Mm-hmm.
We're still getting likes and loves right now.
Thank you
Thank you very much.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and the big like and love here, once again, would be if you want to share this episode, so easy to do, and then just shoot producer Leslie a message on Facebook, and you are going to be entered to win. Like, we have a fabulous collection of prizes now.
Yeah.
It's solid.
I think we
It's
should
solid.
offer some, like a maybe a dinner with author Pat Flynn at some point.
So you guys got to come too.
Just to defend you.
Yeah.
Because we now know that you don't even, a lot of times on the mat, you'll just leap up and leave to go buy a dog or something.
Yeah. And it has to be at Alba too. It has to be.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll host a dinner with all of us, producer Leslie and her husband,
do it at
who
Alba.
produced this amazing, and we'll do it at Alba, and we'll have a guest come.
That'd be cool. An in top form dinner.
Yeah, and
That'd be
then
great.
depend, like if you come, like Dana, she's gonna have to come from Texas. See, we're getting the states of these people in.
Yeah.
Or Tyson, he'd come from Australia.
Yeah.
So
It's worth it
if you
for the
get
food
here,
alone.
we're gonna the food alone, but we're gonna do it at Alba, who should probably be one of our sponsors now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just tossing their name around.
Yeah. I'll work on that one.
So we'll do that when your book comes out. You'll
Sure.
be super famous then.
Yeah.
Rather than just merely famous.
Just big fish, small pond. We're going big fish, big pond.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
So thank you, everybody.
Whale
we look
shark.
forward to seeing you. You're whale shark eating. You're going to be jumping up on beaches and eating St. Bernard. What's your St. Bernard's name?
Lola.
Lola?
Yeah.
So you do not want Lola straying too close to the whale shark bays.
No, she's small for a St. Bernard though. She's.
It should be a tasty morsel for a whale
she
shark. Do
would
whale sharks
be.
eat big dogs?
You know, I'm not versed. That's where that realm of
We
just
competence.
got to the edge.
Yeah,
He was right. Charlie Munger said, you know when you're at the
I'm
edge.
I'm not ready to go beyond that here. Yeah.
I do know that orcas
Yeah.
will leap up. And I just saw a video from New Zealand, which I occasionally see videos from New Zealand because I lived there and I have friends that still live there. And people were bathing, meaning swimming in the ocean, and giant fin, so it was clearly not a shark, turned out to be an orca. It's coming into the bay and coming right toward him, and everybody ran up, and that thing practically came up on the beach. Wow. They'll eat Lola.
Yeah.
Those guys.
This reminds me of the marine biologist Seinfeld episode. Remember that one?
I do.
Yeah. That's a good example of going against Munger's advice.
Well, thank you, everybody. Have a great one.
Thanks,
Remember
folks.
to be in top form.